the way that this decision is being made, that's why I'm glad we're having this discussion and we're open and frank about it. The so-called creative class is something that media, I agree with you, Warren, has created. They determine who's creative.
Actually, Richard Florida.
Yeah, Richard Florida, right. And I saw him at a conference we attended down at the Renaissance Center. They determine who is creative, and the creative class has certain so-called components to it. But there's creativity every day when people rise up in the morning and have the ability to see their community in a different way. The urban gardens that are happening, the situation that's happening in relationship to what Detroit Summer is doing in terms of murals, what's happening in terms of all of the artists who have been unsung for ages, who have envisioned a neighborhood and a community in a different way. All of those components have to fit into that. And it's not just the quote-unquote artist, and I include that in terms of performing artists. How in the hell could you say Detroit is a blank canvas with no creative class, and 2 miles from here you have Motown? And then you got all of the hip hop and all of the techno and all of that happening, which also has visual art attached to that. It's all connected. But it's the question of race, power, and the control that comes with that. So if you want to control and transform Detroit, that's one thing. But if you want to have a re-immersion of Detroit as a new entity, that's a different thing. So we all have to be involved in the latter. And it's not just the artists who are part of that process. I'm going to a meeting at 6 o'clock this afternoon. I'm a board member of the National Lawyers Guild Association, National Lawyers Guild. The National Lawyers Guild was created in 1938 as the first biracial legal organization in America. They actually have an organization called the People of Color Caucus in it now because they haven't had enough people of color in the first biracial legal organization. That is a progressive organization. So I'm glad about this discussion about how we come together. And I think we have to really begin to understand race and power, class, but we have to at the same time see beyond that, because it's not about the power that comes with privilege. It's about what we see as a different city. And I've seen that fortunately with some of the young people sitting at this table and so forth. You have an opportunity to create an America that never was, an America that moves beyond, not the fact that you don't identify and understand race, class, but that you put it in its proper context, that is part of the mosaic of a new fabric of urban America. You can do that. And that's why I'm so glad that this is being discussed today. And we don't have to have acrimony. I don't have to yell at you and say you're that, and you don't have to yell at me and say I'm that. We just have to, when one is left out, make sure that it's like those patches, you know, that are put on the quilts. Make sure that that piece is put in.
I just want to say something about, this is not new, this particular fight. I see Rick Feldman back there. When we started Detroit Summer and put out our first press release, the Detroit Free Press called him and wanted to know what white suburbanite they could interview as a volunteer for Detroit Summer. And Rick fought with them and refused to give them any white suburbanite names, and they ended up having to cover a black urban young woman. But they did that finally, but they didn't want to do that. About 3 days later, when we had gotten our first group of young gang members from the West Coast who came and joined Detroit Summer, the Los Angeles Times called and said, "We hear you got some gang members. Has there been any shooting yet?"
Yeah.
I said, "No." They said, "Have there been any fistfights?" I said, "No." Then they said, "Stabbings?" "No." "Thank you," she said, and hung up. So it was, I mean, I really think we need to see that the narrative of Detroit that is running the mainstream media is what people have been talking about. And It is to delegitimize the people who live here, and it is especially to delegitimize the capacity of black people to run this city and make decisions for themselves. And I think we have to name that, and we have to know, no matter where we might be in our personal journey around race, if we are identified as white people, we cannot play into that narrative. We have got to be very conscious that people will use us, use our passion, in order to delegitimize our brothers and sisters and keep that other narrative going. So we can talk about that later, but I just think we have to name it up front, that there is a, I don't even believe in conspiracy theories, but I do believe that there is a clear narrative going that explains why Detroit is in the shape it is, and it doesn't include any of us doing anything positive.